Oh, I know the answer to this one. It was when he foiled Spectre's plot to launch the stolen nukes.
You do know Thunderball is fiction, right?
It was the time he stopped Hugo Drax from launching the nuke at London.
That's the plot of Moonraker. Also fiction.
Was it the time he stopped Goldfinger, Oddjob, and Pussy Galore from stealing all the gold in Fort Knox?
Let's take it back to 1963 London, the IPEX exhibition.
Ooh, IPEX. International Purveyors of Evil. What starts with X?
No, IPEX, IPEX, the International Printing Machinery and Allied Trades Exhibition.
Printing machinery? That sounds boring. James Bond is never boring.
Yes, normally it would be, I will grant you that. In 1963, printing and typography expert Stanley Morrison convinced the president of the association that this was a golden opportunity to mount a side exhibition concurrent with the trade show that would trace not just the development of printing technology over the 500 years since the first book was printed in 1455, that's the Gutenberg Bible, but also to trace along with that the development of thought and how this technology allowed for the spread of ideas and philosophies and technical and scientific developments, literary trends and new themes to emerge that impacted Western civilization over those 500 years.
Ooh, but Stanley Morrison was a double agent, and he wanted to send a message in code to SMERSH using the Gutenberg Bible.
Well, no, but there was a message in the display. It was just for the entire world. This display represented the values and the aspirations of all of Western civilization from the last 500 years. The display was called Hey, it's Andrew from the Isle of Misfit books, where I aim to share with you books that have struck me and stuck with me from my 25 years of working in rare books. And today we're going to be talking about the catalog from that 1963, that grew out of that 1963 exhibit that is known as PMM in the trade, Printing in the Mind of Man. Often consulted, often imitated. This is the pinnacle of rare book cataloging. So coming up with the titles that would be included in the exhibit was one thing, and that took the editorial committee 16 rounds to finally winnow it down to the books that would be included. But finding copies of each to then fill out the display was quite another, and that seemed impossible to some on the committee, but not to Percy Muir. He had the proverbial ace up his sleeve, and that was his friend and client and customer, Ian Fleming. I was less apprehensive on this score than some of my colleagues. Muir writes in his introduction to the second edition, because I was reasonably assured of the resources available from three important collections. And these three collections were King's College, Cambridge, which lent 51 books, the Fleming collection, which provided 44, and Muir, of course, knew this collection intimately as he had sold most, if not all, of these books directly to Fleming. And then 31 were from the library installed by Mr. Lilly at Indiana University, which is now where all of Fleming's books and papers also reside, sold there by Fleming's widow after his death. Nearly half of the books at the exhibition came from personal collections from around the world. Of those personal collections, Fleming's was the largest. So Fleming, along with his fellow collectors, and aided greatly by his fictional creation, James Bond, and the money that that character had earned him, helped mount this very impressive display. There was a softcover catalog that was issued to attendees with brief descriptions of each book, and this grew into the larger companion book, Printing in the Mind of Man. This is the second edition. This is a catalog that all rare book dealers are very familiar with. This was the second book that I was handed on day one of my first day on the job way back in 1999. I was encouraged to read it and study it, not to memorize it, but definitely understand the sort of book that was contained in this catalog. This was the sort of book that we aspired to sell as rare book dealers. Books that made a difference, books that made things happen, as Fleming thought of it. I suppose this was bound to happen at some point. After recording yesterday and thinking I had all the shots I needed, I sat down to start editing last night and realized, oh, I somehow left out a fairly large chunk. So rather than trying to re-record and make it look like I did it all yesterday, I'm just going to take the opportunity to try to do something a little bit different. Okay, so Printing in the Mind of Man, to my mind, is the pinnacle of rare book cataloging. It was edited by John Carter and Percy Muir. Percy Muir, legend, just for having sold rare books to Ian Fleming. I think that gets you legendary status. One of the drivers of the PMM exhibition, along with John Carter and Stanley Morrison. John Carter, I said earlier that PMM was the second book I was handed. The first book was written by John Carter, and that's the ABCs of book collecting. And if you wanted to know about rare books, and you just had those two titles, the ABCs and PMM, you would know about 85% of what you need to know for rare books. So these two legends of the rare book trade, but very much from their time as well. Remember, this is early 60s England. So the catalog is fairly Anglo-centric, Eurocentric. There are a number of American titles, but as we'll see as we go through, I think there are some glaring omissions as well. But that's to be expected from a book from this time period, and I don't think we should just disregard it because there are some omissions and some blind spots. That's kind of the value of an attempt like this, right? It might not be 100% what we would want it to be today, but it's pretty close. So let's just take a look. The title page, of course, they're very concerned about the print and layout, typography. That was a part of the exhibit as well. So it's really a very nicely designed book. You've got a new introduction by Percy Muir. I believe Carter was dead at the time of this second edition. You've got the original preface and intro, sort of just giving the history of the exhibition. Introduction by Dennis Hay, Fiat Lux, Let There Be Light. And then we get into the catalog. And his introduction is sort of the history of printing, and very interesting. And we start in 1455 with the Bible in Latin, the Gutenberg Bible. Impossible to find complete copies on the market anymore. You will sometimes find individual leaves that are sold, but they did have one of these at the exhibit, of course. And then it goes, and it's organized chronologically. Sir Thomas Malory's Mort d'Arthur, the first printing of the Arthurian legends from 1485, printed by William Caxton, the earliest English printer. It's one thing after another. The Columbus letter from 1493, reporting on discoveries in the New World. We've got Ptolemy, expounded by Johannes Muller. Marco Polo from 1496. De la meravigliose cose del mundo, which, pardon my Italian, but of the marvelous things of the world. And it's just one thing after another. And like I said, because it's chronological, you do get some strange bedfellows on these two-page spreads. You got Thomas More's Utopia from 1516 with Plutarch's Lives, 1517, and then Martin Luther, the Reformation, in the Protestant Reformation in 1520. Such a great way to kind of dip your toe into the history of printing and the history of thought. For every two-page spread, you'll find something that you recognize and maybe want to learn a little bit more about, or maybe really know a lot about. But on that same two-page spread, you will probably find something that you don't know anything about, that you've never heard of before. And so this is a great book on books, and it kind of always is projecting you outwards toward other books, whether it be, or to the internet, you know, to go down a rabbit hole on a certain author or a book or a period of time or a subject matter, may even lead you to search out that original book in its original or in translation and read it all in its entirety. You've got Agricola's De Re Metallica, which is his book on metals and mining and metallurgy. And there, I believe, is a great illustration here, yes, which looks like a Richard Scarry cross-section. If you remember those children's books where he would have the cross-section, you know, of a house showing all of the workings of the house. It reminds me of that. And you've got some books that, even books that were anti-book, such as the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, the Index of Prohibited Books, which was issued by the Catholic Church in their attempt to censor. That was 1559 and was a series of books that was continually updated over the years until not too long ago. And as you can see, there are some illustrations, there are some reproductions of title pages, and Don Quixote, of course. There is literature, there's exploration, there's science, there's theology, there's philosophy, there is a lot on social movements. You've got, a little later on, you've got Das Kapital, Anatomy of Melancholy. That's one of my favorite books. I would love to do a video on that book by itself at some point. I would like to get to that. You've got Shakespeare, of course. There's a lot on the law, because that, of course, shapes how our societies function. Robert Boyle on chemistry, Thomas Hobbes, Leviathan, and Robert Hooke's on microscopy, micrographia. William Penn on Quakerism, No Cross, No Crown from 1669. And it just goes on and on and on. This is Christian Huygens' first pendulum clock with a diagram of how that works from 1673. And it just really makes you think about the various additions to the technological improvements or additions and how those affected society. This is kind of interesting. Edward Tyson's Orangutan. You have a reproduction of the title page here, or the anatomy of a pygmy compared with that of a monkey, an ape, and a man. Their headline is The Missing Link, so it, maybe a precursor to Darwin and Wallace, who, of course, are contained in here as well. We got the Declaration of Independence, of course, Adam Smith's Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. You've got the Encyclopedia Britannica. And we can skip ahead a little bit. Thomas Paine on the Rights of Man from 1791. You've got Mary Wollstonecraft, The Rights of Woman, A Vindication of the Rights of Woman from 1792. And the next year, William Godwin, who went on to become her husband, his Inquiry Concerning Political Justice from 1793. I believe they met after both those books were published and went on to be married and quite happy. So the Mungo Park's exploration of Africa, I know James Cook is in here with his explorations of the Pacific. So among the oversights, I would include, of course, Frederick Douglass's Narrative of the Life, his autobiography, his first one, or any of the three, really. No Booker T. Washington, Up from Slavery, no W.E.B. Du Bois, Souls of Black Folk. I think that's a real oversight. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is not included. That seems a glaring oversight. This kind of goes along with the Thunderball illustration. This is Robert Fulton, Torpedo War and Submarine Explosions from 1809. Got Karl von Clausewitz on warfare. Next, that's from 1832 to 1834. Next to Goethe, Faust from 1834, and Hans Christian Andersen's The Ugly Duckling from 1835 to 1837. Like I said, you've got just great and very strange juxtapositions among these pages, which is one of the things that makes it fun to flip through. Friedrich Nietzsche on the Superman, also sprach Zarathustra. I don't know if my German is very good, but thus spake Zarathustra from 1891. Freud on psychoanalysis. Marie Curie, The Discovery of Radium from 1903. Alexander Fleming's Discovery of Penicillin. So you get the drift. Fermi on the atom bomb. And it ends finally with John Maynard Keynes, The General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money, the foundation of Keynesian economics, an important counter to laissez-faire and libertarianism. And then finally ending with Churchill, I think appropriately, his 1940 speech about while England was still standing alone, the height of World War II, praising the Royal Air Force when he said, "Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few." Very famous quote, very famous speech. And then that is it. This book is actually a better defender of Western civilization in its admittedly very mundane way than Bond, with his cartoonish villains and dastardly plots. Bond represents the heroic, single-handed defense of Western civilization, but this book actually brings together and holds up as a beacon all those Western values. Of course, without this exhibition, without this catalog, all of these books would still have their importance. They would still exist, they would still be read and studied, still be collected and esteemed. But this one book brings them all together in a concise, easily digestible, illuminating, and even entertaining format, with illustrations, no less, to be handed down from one generation to the next, to say, this is what we're about as a society, as a culture, as a civilization. This is our legacy. This is what we defend in our daily quotidian manner. Thick enough to be bulletproof? That I'm not sure about. And all because of a man named Bond, James Bond. So I hope you've enjoyed this brief tour of one of my favorite books. And if you have, please leave a like and subscribe. I will be continuing to put out these sorts of illustrated book tours of the books that have meant something to me in my 25 years working in rare books, and books that I think the algorithm is unlikely to show you. That is the mission of my channel. If you would like to see a similar tour, click here. The best way to support this channel would be to check out my books. I'll have links below. Thanks for stopping by. I'll see you in the next one. And had been a serious collector since before he wrote his first James Bond book, Dr. No. Oh.